right now, but I did not want to miss the conference completely. So here's a virtual presentation. I'm still live, still around, and happy to have, welcome any questions that you might have as well. So the integrated support environment to begin with is our new platform. It's effectively a type of smart browser that we use within the SAP product support organization now to digitally augment our knowledge workers, our support engineers, etc. And this is kind of stage one of a larger project. So it's an augmented decision support system, effectively. So, I'll begin this talk with a little bit around the topic of being human and why we need to digitally augment people, why we need that. This leads to the topic of technological debiasing, which is effectively what the integrated support environment is. I'll go through a little sort of mock demo because it's too sketchy to use the live system, and also privacy concerns with actual tickets, etc. But I have an equivalent demo that I'll then show you, and then talk about a few sort of, wrap up with a few ideas about how you can set up something like this yourself, and then we'll go to Q&A. So to begin with, being human, I'll ask a couple of questions. I know that we don't have live polls, but you can answer them for yourself. Just take a moment to answer them for yourself in your own mind, and then I'll provide the answers to give an illustration of some of the challenges that we have as humans. So the first question is, are you a better than average driver? Don't think too long about it. Just answer for yourself in your mind whether you think that you're a better than average driver. Okay. If you answered yes, that would be an example of overconfidence, but you're not alone. In 1981, there was a study of US drivers that found that 93% of the US population and 69% of the Swedish sample put themselves in the top 50% of drivers, so as being better than average. From another perspective, it's not entirely wrong though, because if you look at the median drivers versus the average drivers, most people think about the median, so being within the top 50% in that sense, but actually driving skill is not normally distributed. So there are a few really, really poor drivers, and most people are actually better than average in that sense. But despite that, when people are thinking about it, they're thinking typically about being better than most people that they know. Overconfidence is one of the most prevalent biases that we suffer from, especially in organizational contexts. But in life in general, we're very, very poor at estimating our own abilities. Here's another example. Looking at these two cities, which one do you think has more inhabitants? Now, some may know, others may not. Just answer for yourself quickly without thinking too much. Geneva or Thun? If you answer Geneva, you'd be correct. And in fact, the majority of people, 80 to 90% of people, will actually typically answer Geneva and be correct in answering that. And the reason for that is that this is known as a heuristic. So sort of a general rule, a trick of the trade, so to say, or a general rule of thumb. This is known as take the best heuristic, but there are other names for it as well. There's a type of availability or information availability or recognition heuristic, because most people recognize the city of Geneva as compared to Thun. And this is an example where heuristics can work quite well, because the correlation between the size of a city or the size of a concert or the importance of a football game, the most important topics in a political campaign, are actually all highly correlated to the recognition heuristic. So if you've heard of it, the chances are it probably is somehow more important or being talked about more frequently. And so actually it's quite a good example of a bias, but that's actually founded in science in that respect. Here's another one. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with very little interest in people or the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul, he has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Is Steve more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? So think about it for a moment. And then again, in your mind, choose one of the two options. All right. He's far more likely to be a farmer. Despite the description, and this is what gets most people, is we tend to look at a particular profile. And this one, around 80% of people will typically choose farmer over librarian. Sorry, the other way around, would choose librarian over farmer, simply because he sounds like a librarian. It's the character, the personality, etc. What it fails to include, though, is the base rate. So what is the frequency of farmers versus librarians? And as we see, it's much, 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 much higher. So even considering all of those details, it's still far more likely that there is a farmer with his exact personality than that he's going to be a male librarian. The base rate fallacy is a really, really powerful one as well. We often will make estimates based on character traits, thinking that somehow that's more important. And this is illustrated by Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, the only psychologist, I believe, to have done so as well. And his very well-known book, Thinking Fast and Slow. So a lot of these examples of cognitive biases are illustrated there. So the other really, really important one that we face in the business world is the availability heuristic. I won't ask you a question about that, but again, it's basically similar to the recognition heuristic in that what you hear and what you know about, you tend to give more weight to. So in the context of the media, for example, what the media reports may actually be a small section of what's really going on. This happened a lot in 2016 and in the past, several years. The rise of fake news and the post-truth world, the silos of information that have led to a polarization of society, and a lot of that is happening because of the availability heuristic. If people have heard of something in their local community, etc., or from colleagues or friends, they tend to sort of give it more weight. It's available to them. This availability information heuristic. So this is another really powerful one. But all of these can be dealt with, including most of these here. I highly recommend that you download this. There's a direct link to it as well. This is a really nice summary visualization of, I think, 167 or so cognitive biases. There are probably a few more than this, but this is a nice way of categorizing. Just to remind yourself that we're constantly, working with these evolutionary shortcuts, and they're often not the right approach. We often need to actually think in a bit more detail and use higher cognitive thinking rather than taking shortcuts to make those decisions. But we do rely on heuristics for several reasons. And one of them is because there's just too much information. So you can say, yeah, that's fine to be able to, I don't have the time to spend hours and hours researching a topic to find out if it's really true. Especially with fake news and conspiracy theories and all the rest, you may not care enough about it, and that's completely fine for most of those. But this leads to, in a business context in particular, this same sort of trend happens as well. There's also a huge amount of information in a business context, and it leads to a certain cognitive laziness. And we have that. We are fundamentally lazy cognitively because there's just too much going on, and we have to survive in the world. So this is an example of what you'd call effort minimization. Another reason is that problems can be difficult. So if something is challenging, what will often happen is that you'll replace it with a simpler but similar question. It's known as attribute substitution. And if you've ever been in various executive board meetings or project meetings, etc., you'll often find that when there are tough decisions to be made, people will start to substitute the problem with other problems that are actually not directly related to what you're trying to solve. They're far too simplistic models, but they are convincing because they're easy to understand and to answer. And again, if you need to act quickly, then you may use heuristics as well. This is the fast and frugal example. And that the example with Geneva and Thun is an example of a fast and frugal heuristic. But in that case, it typically, given the right situation, it can work very well. The problem is that the cognitive laziness leads effectively to effort over accuracy. So you will minimize your effort at the expense of accuracy. Attribute substitution can lead to straw men. So you're creating things in an argumentative situation, you'll call it a straw man, but it's basically a false attribution that happens, and speed over accuracy again. So all of these heuristics can lead to a sacrifice of accuracy in order to minimize effort and stress. But what can we do? These are the facts, and yet there are ways that we can deal with this at scale. So if we accept our humanity and the fact that our rationality is bounded and our cognitive resources limited in a world that's really just not helping, what can we do to make better decisions? This leads to the topic of debiasing. There are several categories of debiasing, but one is motivational. So if you notice that someone has an incentive to hold a certain opinion, and this is what we often refer to as corporate politics, you can hold that individual accountable for that choice, or you can help them to include additional information into the calculation. But the topic of accountability is really important, because often people will be holding an opinion and they simply won't be accountable, and so there's no cost to them of maintaining that bias. Another one is cognitive, and that's the sort of list that you saw, the codex before, is fundamentally a list of many different types of cognitive biases. There are so many of them, but there are many, many techniques to help debias, and they're not perfect, but they will help us to improve the situation at the very least. So anchoring is another topic. Whatever you tend to hear as an estimate will kind of anchor your future thinking around that particular topic. If I were to tell you that one estimate suggested that we make 20 to 30,000 decisions per day, that's actually going to anchor you when I say I can reduce that to 5,000 or to 1,000 decisions per day. But actually, other research has shown that major decisions, it may be only 70 to 100. So when you're re-anchored that way, then that can actually lead you to more accurate estimates overall. But anchoring is very insidious and very difficult to change. Fundamentally, this leads us to the topic of technological debiasing, and that really is what the integrated support environment, which, by the way, you see in the frame. My PowerPoint wallpaper is effectively the platform that I'm talking about as well. This is effectively decision assistance or decision support software, and it can be scaled, and you can run up various randomized controlled trials. You can run all sorts of tests to ensure that it's actually having the desired impact. You can make things that are typically intangible, like communications and the effect of it. You can start to make those empirical and really sort of academically robust. So one of the major areas of that when you're developing a platform of this nature is called choice architecture. And choice architecture is a way of presenting information that just makes it easy to make the right decisions, or to improve the decisions that you're making, or improve your understanding of a given topic. And just to illustrate very, very simply, if I were to ask you, how many lines there are here, you would probably try to mentally group and calculate. But if I simply just change the way that it's designed, then you can almost immediately say that there are 25 lines there. But with the previous example, you'd have to actually count them. So it's the same lines, the same number of lines, but by changing the design of it, you have the essence of what choice architecture is all about. There are other methods that you can use as well, though. So one powerful method is translation. You take information and translate it into a more easily consumable form. You can make information visible. Sometimes it's very, very difficult to find, or it's simply not prominent, or even not being properly calculated or used. So making information visible is another important one. Changing the default. 80 to 90% of people will typically stay with a default. Now, whether that's an insurance policy that you've signed, or the settings on your Spotify account or your Amazon account, whatever it happens to be, we tend to stay with defaults. So by designing better defaults, you can actually then improve the overall situation at scale for all users of whatever the particular tool or environment is that you've created. So defaulting is one of the most well-researched ones, actually, and that's why you'll see that with a lot of systems too. Changing the range of decision options is another important one. So by showing different options in different contexts, designing it differently. So that can also be examples like you have a most popular kind of plan for a service, could be Grammarly, for example. And typically you'll see that they are differently displayed and differently organized according to what the company would actually prefer you to sort of choose. And it's kind of like a middle ground. It's better than the free version, but not quite as good as a super gold premium version. But ultimately that helps the company to optimize their profits whilst giving you typically a decent experience from the platform as well. Obtaining commitment is another really important one. Once people commit to a topic, they tend to stay with that topic because it leads to dissonance if they don't. Design, like as mentioned previously, just changing the way that something looks makes a huge amount of difference to the ability to process information. Color is very, very powerful. There's a lot of science around, color theory in itself is its own discipline. But colors can evoke certain responses in and of themselves, and especially in context with other colors, you can achieve very powerful results through that. Social cues is the entire area of social influence, as illustrated by the works of Robert Cialdini, etc., who wrote the book Influence in '84, recently relaunched this year, highly recommended. We are herd animals. Or social predators, however you want to say it. We look around and we see what other people are doing, especially when there's uncertainty. You tend to sort of think about what the rest of the herd is doing, what the rest of the group is doing. So social cues can be very, very important. And then you have what's called nudges and notifications. Richard Thaler won the Nobel Prize several years ago for his work around nudges and choice architecture in its own right. But basically, this little 5 here is something that you'll all know from your mobile phones and various applications. It's a nudge. It's telling you that there's something that you need to check with that particular application. It's a very, very simple example, but very powerful and frequently used. So the integrated support environment is built around all of these principles of how following the user journey. It's a decision support system. So where do people need to make decisions and how can we improve those decisions at scale, technologically and empirically, rather than just sort of haphazardly trying things out. So we've built and designed this platform that's fully A/B test enabled, etc. We can run multivariate tests. We can have different messages showing for different people. We can position applications or extensions slightly differently. And what we also do is we can record any interaction with the system at all. And this leads us to this concept of automation leading to augmentation, which is what the platform does. So we seek to automate any and all insights that, in this case, a support engineer, but also managers may need to do their daily work. Then we look at the extent to which they actually interact with those insights that are provided. And that becomes further interaction data or further data that helps to train the algorithms that lead to the automated insights. So you have what's called basically a cybernetic loop, where every interaction and every piece of information is actually input data for another system and every other system ultimately. So by building that by default, we ensure that the application of machine learning methods now and in the future will be seamless, because that's what people often miss. They think about, well, how can we apply machine learning to a given situation or a given platform or problem? And then they find that they don't have the data in the right format for it. They've not collected the right data. They didn't think about maybe even interaction data, or if they did, it was not connected with timestamps or whatever else. If you don't do the homework in making sure that you have the right data foundation, machine learning becomes prohibitively difficult. But if you build a system from the beginning that is designed to basically have machine learning methods and this optimization procedure built in, it becomes very simple then. I mean, the methods are still complex, but you have the data foundation, which is 90% of the work ultimately. To collect this kind of data, though, we also need to have a very strong security concept. So we've built it in such a way that we have a pseudo-anonymous ID known as the ISE ID, the Integrated Support Environment ID, and it exists on the server alone. And then we have locally, so this screen that you see here, my profile picture up here, my D user or I user, my SAP ID is stored within this platform. So any application that needs my SAP ID can still contact me and I can still interact with that application. But anything that I do within that platform is not stored against my D or I user, my SAP user, it's stored against the ISE ID. So we have a very clear sort of division of identity. The browser that I'm using, the ISE, the platform knows who I am. and has both of these IDs, but I'm the only one that has access to it. No admin can go and get my ISC ID and link it to my SAP user, unless they actually have access to my computer. And if I were to lose that, I have a recovery key that's unique to me, many phrases, and it's stored also only locally on my own machine. So I can recover it, but not even an admin could. So if I lost that, there's no way to recover it technically or any other way. Taking this approach of anonymity on the one hand, but still being able to aggregate data to a natural person, to an individual, without knowing who that person is. So I'd like to say the ISC knows everything about you except who you are. Now, it doesn't know everything about you. It knows what you're doing within the platform, but it does not know that you are the person doing it. We have very, very rudimentary demographics that we're collecting. And what we do for studies, when we run a study through this platform, then we simply collect that demographic data for the period of the study itself, and then it's deleted immediately again. So we have these opportunities as well. You see that it has a toolbar to the left. We have what's called the Omni bar, which is effectively a search bar, a chat bar, whatever type of bar you like. And then the task bar, the adaptive task bar is at the right. And this is, the apps at the left are displayed in the main pane. They're augmented and extended by the tasks, by the taskbar. So basically we can take anything that we can display within this window and we can augment and extend it with additional insights and functionality very, very easily. The interface itself and the approach is quite simple. It looks quite simple. Of course, the technology supporting it is not as trivial, but that's what you want, right? You want users to have a really simple experience and a very uncomplicated, user-friendly experience that minimizes their effort. Typically, to achieve that, just like with Apple, you have an immense amount of complexity in the actual system itself. So, to kind of get close to wrapping up, I want to augment, just to illustrate how this kind of looks in a very simple workflow of a colleague, one of our developers named Jeff. So a day in the life of Jeff. Jeff would begin his day within the integrated support environment and typically in the tasks page. This would show him then this landing page can be customized and you can have different wallpapers, etc. as well. Here's his tasks and his notifications. At the moment, there's nothing super critical in the notifications. And Jeff is a gamer as well, so he really, really needs a new keyboard. So he decides instead that he's going to go to Google. He goes to Google and types in his search terms gamer keyboard and hits return. And as he does, he starts to browse through the various options. But the adaptive taskbar at the top now has shown him that there is a service level agreement that is expiring soon. And this is critical. So this means that a customer has been waiting for some time for a solution and the agreed legal contracts are at risk of expiring, basically. And there are two of those. So gamer keyboard has to wait. Jeff clicks this instead and sees in the popover that there are two notifications of very high service level agreements. So he's going to go straight to the ServiceNow application where the ticket can be opened and he starts to have a look at it. As he does, the system has adapted again. Has adapted again. And we have only one SLA, but now we have 5 pieces of content as well. Browsing that, he can see that actually this one is probably the best. So he attaches it and closes the application again. But the problem is not quite solved. So he begins to ponder a little bit more and think to himself, I'm a transportation management expert. This is not really my thing. I wonder if there's anyone to help, but the system has already proactively done this for him. And it's invoked the swarming extension. The swarming extension tells him that there are 2 people available to swarm that have expertise in this particular topic and are available now. So he clicks that, he sees one of them is Peter Parker, who is quite a smart person, and Dr. Strange, who is very adept at the magic of solving software problems. So he goes to initiate a swarm, and that immediately leads to MS365 being invoked within the platform. A Teams session is set up with both Peter and Dr. Strange, and the share screen is being shared, and they can now swarm around this topic, which basically means create a flash team or a small collaborative team to immediately start working on this problem together. Problem is then solved. So Jeff decides to return to his gamer keyboard search and manages to purchase one for himself. And that's a very, very simple workflow. So thanks to the integrated support environment, Jeff had the right information, access to the right people at the right time, and with minimal effort and emotional strain. In previous scenarios, Jeff would have had to have gone to several applications, would have needed several windows, would have had to have been proactive in doing so because there'd be no notifications. There would be several instances where he would have to switch tasks from one application to another, could not leave the main, would have to leave the main pane of the actual work that he's working on. And we know that task switching can lead to 40 to 60% of productivity loss. When you lose that focus, it can take you a long time to sort of, return to that focus and be as productive. So it's a major productivity drain. And also it leads into emotional stress as well, and disengagement ultimately if that continues over a long period of time. So the platform is aimed to really minimize effort whilst maximizing the impact of the individual. And our initial early studies have indicated that people that are using the platform solve tickets 20% to 40% faster than engineers that are not using the system. And that for almost all workflows actually so far, the task switching can be reduced to almost zero. Our objective is that you should never have to leave the integrated support environment to do your work. Now, there will be occasions where that's not possible, but that's our objective. We want to absolutely minimize the amount of time that you need to actively switch tasks. It's one thing if you're looking at a little notification or a small popover that's providing you with a quick piece of information that you can consume without losing the cognitive flow of the work that you're doing. It's something completely different if you have to then go searching for information and start forming networks in your mind of what you need to know. If the system knows what you need and when you need that information and can provide it in a form that's easy to consume, then ultimately it's going to minimize your effort and make you far more productive. So to sort of wrap up the general approach, some fast food for thought is ultimately, no matter what you're doing, whether you're using a platform like this or some other approach, we are all Jeff, and technology can help make us even Jeffer. So we are heir to various cognitive biases. We need information. We need it pre-processed. We need insights. We don't need the huge amounts of data that we've got in our databases and our corporate, corporate data stores. We need information that has been processed, pre-processed into a form that can be consumed as an insight. And we need that. We don't necessarily always know when we need that. We don't know if there's a document available that could solve the problem immediately. We don't necessarily know if there are people available to help us. We might go and do a training, for example, and not necessarily know what the steps are to that or what other resources could be available. Or we could be onboarding a new colleague and not necessarily know for that particular role what the core inventory is to help sort of pre-order that in the onboarding situation. We could be communicating with our employees. This platform, ultimately, for our organization at least, will also be the central communications platform, because in addition to what we have here, we have a fully featured integrated messaging environment that can provide messages in context. So if I'm looking at, if I go to MS365 and there is news from our IT organization about updates or improvements to the MS365 environment, rather than send that out in a newsletter, I can actually provide that to the user in the context of them actually being interested in that topic. And that's going to lead to a higher engagement and readership and the greater likelihood of them actually consuming that information and acting upon it. But it goes beyond that, because as long as they're using the integrated support environment, I can even see whether they did act on that information or not, because we can track the user journey anonymously. And we have everything stored in a graph database in that sense as well. So we can literally create a narrative for what people are navigating through and whether it's actually having an impact. And that leads, gives us the option to not only look at correlation, but causation in our design. So we can find causal relationships. They just looked at that particular message. It was just shown to them. And they've then gone to look at the MS365 page or whatever it happens to have been for that particular topic. And we can design that through randomization as well. So we always want to identify and chart a journey. The entire integrated support environment is based around, the platform enables this now, but everything we do is about a journey. We don't want to look at processes, goals, and decisions, and where people need to invoke many systems or make more complex decisions. We then want to choose an approach to how we can minimize the number of steps that it takes to do that, similar to like a macro in Outlook. This is also known as robotic process automation, which we're also building into the system so that people can very quickly design their own macros and their own robotized processes, basically. So we choose an approach and define the metrics throughout the entire system, and then effectively we measure and then we review, and then we review each of those processes again until the system is optimized. It's always ultimately going to be an optimization problem. So that's why, I shifted our team away from talking about reducing and increasing, and to start thinking about optimizing, minimizing and maximizing, because that's always going to be contextual, and that sets the right expectations. That employee engagement, for example, is already very high at SAP. People are upset when it drops a percentage point or two. And for me, that's just fluctuations in the data, because ultimately, I don't think it can get much higher than it is already. I think we've effectively reached a sort of maximized employee engagement. And I really can't think of much more that could be done to sort of increase that, at least not at a global level. So there are going to be certain aspects where you simply need to have the right expectations. A platform like this is also a data science environment in its own right, and it's a behavioral science laboratory as well, but built in a way that is fully respectful of people's own data and their identities, without invoking their identities in any way, and yet still giving us the opportunities to run very, very detailed behavioral studies in that respect. So yeah, that's effectively the integrated support environment. The driving philosophy is to minimize effort always, and we combine the aspects of automation and augmentation into a single platform that can be used to model pretty much any process within a business or a corporate context, well beyond the support world as well. We're working on other scenarios now with other departments to use this same approach. So it's a very powerful approach, and may give some inspiration to others as to what you might do in your own organizations. Thank you very much. And I would then leave, if there's any questions, if we still have time, I'm happy to hear them.